Chris Duffin with Kabuki Strength and Build Fast Formulas, coming at you with our first installment of our fundamental movement series. Coach Cass with Kabuki Strength has joined us as well today, so welcome.
Hi.
So we're going to start with breathing. So sounds really simple. We all do it all day, every day. This is how we stay alive. But we've got to understand what's actually happening, because there's some things that go wrong. But if we talk about breathing is a function, or one of the functions of the diaphragm. And if we've got any one function off, we could have potential issues throughout the rest of the chain involving that. So those three functions are respiration, basically intake and exhalation for oxygen, stabilization, and then we're going to get into that when we get into our bracing piece, which will be the next piece of the series. And we're not going to have a piece on the last one, which is the sphincter, but basically acting and is opening and closing the tubes responsible for fluid and gas expulsion, as we know, taking a dump. Okay. So before we get into breathing, we've got to understand the role of posture as it relates to that. So posture is really important for us to get this alignment of basically that diaphragm to the pelvic floor. If we're not able to do this, it affects the nervous system as a whole. You're basically down-regulating the body through the nervous system, reducing that neural output. This is a big deal. So this happens because the body knows it's not in a good position. It's trying to protect itself. This is why we start having our hips tighten up, our shoulders losing mobility, all this sorts of stuff. So it's really important to understand that everything that we're doing here actually affects neural output. So we're not just talking about reducing injury rates, but we're talking about increasing your performance, ability to put load out there on the end, to throw an implement, lift a weight. Like, we're gonna see an increase in activity around that. We're gonna be able to improve motor learning rates. If we're in good position, we're able to make things where we're able to learn and ingrain those patterns a lot better. So those are some key points, but we often have some gaps here. So this one is called an open scissor, and this is when we're walking around this big chest or boobs in the air position. We've got the pelvis tilted, these sorts of things. We also often see this in lifting. We get into an overhead position, we go to squat, we start getting into these patterns because maybe we lack some of those mobility, or we just don't have that awareness of those positions. So in this one here, we've got the diaphragm close to a line, but we've still got the tilt, or we may be crunching towards the rear with a little bit of kyphosis, things like that. So the first trick is actually, we've got to be able to get this position. If you're not, you'll find that your breathing patterns actually improve once we close and align those areas. And it's a really interesting no. I'll give you the answer really quick. But what is the #1 healthcare cost in America? Is it heart disease, cancer, diabetes, AIDS, any of those sorts of things? No. The #1 healthcare cost in America is back pain. And all of this, as we talked to, actually is something that we can do that controls and is one of the major contributors to it. So it's just a really important thing to have there. Coach Cass, do you have anything to add on this?
Just to reinforce what you were saying about postural improvement is crucial. We're going to be showing you a lot of drills through this movement series, and a lot of people will approach these drills without even thinking about what their start position is, what their posture is throughout their daily life. And their posture through their daily life is a crucial component to think about when addressing it to your performance. So posture and the relationship with not just proper breathing, but with performance is going to be a great fundamental, a great place to start in assessing and refining your own movement.
Yeah. We talk about it, we're not going to be, built on like you've got to maintain this perfect posture all the time. There's what's called movement variability through the day. You can move, shift, do all this sorts of stuff. But when we're starting to get in loaded patterns, we really want to, that's the times we really want to correct it. And then just being aware of it, because if we're constantly walking around in specific patterns, then we've got issues, and that's what we see quite a bit. So,
yes, a lot.
But it's not like, oh, I'm just a little off and I've got to maintain this all day long. that's not what we're necessarily talking about. You're going to shift and move is very natural. And perfect posture of what we're talking about here before we start the breathing piece is a range.
Yes.
So it's not this dialed just this one hair perfect. There's a range that works within. But that's a big difference between, you know, this. So, which seems subtle, but here we go. Now we're in a better position and breathing will improve. Okay. So it's important to understand how this works, but the diaphragm acts as a piston. It drives down. It's connected up through here at the base of the ribs. You can kind of imagine it's a large cone, and it drives down with a co-contraction of the pelvic floor, which is why we want those opposing each other. Now, this point here around bracing, even though we haven't got into bracing, is important to understand because it's very similar when it comes to breathing. But it's accomplished by eccentrically loading the abdominal wall, the obliques, and the thoracolumbar musculature. So basically, we want to use that diaphragm and pelvic floor to drive this way and push out all the way around. So we're not talking about, so that would be the eccentric loading. Concentric loading would be taking the outer abdominal wall or any of that structure and contracting it inward to create pressure. And we want to, the best quality is going to be this outward expansion. And you can see I'm starting to show this very large belly here just as I'm demonstrating because I'm driving that down and filling outwards 360 degrees. So we're going to talk through some ways to practice this, bring awareness to this, and give you some drills. So we have a cueing sequence and some drills. So the first one is just to breathe what's called diaphragmatically. So what that means is imagine is it starting as a wave from the bottom up. So it's going to take a breath in and it's going to fill. And you should see this wave move. And actually it'll come all the way up into the lower ribs and have some outward expansion in those lower rib activity. But we're not going to have any upward movement of the clavicle. So we're looking for horizontal expansion and not vertical movement, which moves us right into the next cue. So Cass, I'm going to have you demonstrate the clavicle cue, but she's going to reach across there, and you can do both hands at the same time. So one on each clavicle. And as she's breathing, we shouldn't have any upward movement of the clavicle. So it's a nice quick test. We're breathing and we're filling from the bottom up with some expansion all the way through, all the way into this lower, but we don't have any vertical breathing or movement at the clavicle. Do you have anything to add on those first two?
No.
Okay. The next one, this I find only works for about 80% of people, but we call this the breathe right strip because this is essentially what makes a breathe right strip works. It actually brings about some proprioceptive awareness. I'm not sure if that's actually the right term for this one, but which then cues an improvement in breathing patterns, which then helps with our snoring, sleeping problems with some individuals. We're going to imagine filling this area right here at the base of the nose, okay? Right there. And imagine that there's a balloon in each side, and what you want to do is inflate and push those balloons open. Just fill that area. As you do that, you should feel this expansion through the belly. Now, if you do the opposite and think about, like, imagine seeing a video of like a pig breathing and its nostrils flaring. Imagine sucking air in at the tip of the nose and that big flare at the end of the nostril. You'll feel that it all comes up here automatically. So if this cue doesn't work for you, go ahead and move on. Another thing that you can do is actually give it a bunch of rub first, just to bring an afferent burn, a little burn on the skin before doing this drill to help bring the awareness to that point. And again, that's kind of basically how a breathe right strip works. It starts improving that function. Myself personally, when I'm coaching people, I see about 75 or 80% of people respond well to that cue, and others not so. It just doesn't work for them. And then the last one is to breathe into the back of your throat. So imagine pulling that air into the back of your throat, so filling up there in the back. Okay? Do you have anything to add to Cass?
Just that when you're breathing, try to relax as much as you can. A lot of times I feel people are struggling with, for example, the clavicle Q because they're already tight through here. And so they're trying to take more breath in, and they can't because they're already tight through their musculature of their accessory muscles.
Just really try to shake it out. Oftentimes when I'm working with people on this, I'll just grab them right here and say, just relax, relax, because you'll see this tightness and tension, and if we can just get them to relax, you don't want to see any tension in the face, just relax, relax, and that will help with those patterns. Because that's actually one of the reasons that we forget to breathe properly is because of the stress in the society that we work in today. And there's actually research around it that shows that actually just being on digital media devices, whether it's stress or not, you can be in perfect posture texting on your phone, but it doesn't change the fact that it changes your breathing patterns. There's a response to this that is not good. And so this is part of why we don't breathe that well, particularly as adults. Although I'm finding it a lot with even the teenage population now when we see them coming in, that we see these issues. So now we're going to talk through some drills, okay? So let's go ahead and pull the bench out, and we'll just have you sit facing on the bench first. Good. Okay, so we're going to want to think about filling low into the abs. So right in here, right on your waistline, up towards the center, a couple inches off of center. Right here, we're going to imagine filling that up, pushing out, kind of almost down. That's that first part of that wave. We should also be able to, right here into the obliques, and you can see my fingers moving out, is Cass's obliques move out, okay? We want to go into the lower rib. So that's where I talked about. So in here, we're going to have this expansion in here. A lot of people, oh, this is Cass, you know how to breathe well. A lot of strength athletes we find have this rib cage that's locked down, and this is not good. They may be able to belly breathe. You might be able to even find this in some yoga people that learn belly breathing. It's all this forward breathing. That's not what we're talking about. It's all the way around, and we're going to work through all those cues in a second. But they'll end up with this locked down here because the diaphragm isn't working well for breathing, so it's not working well for stabilization, and so the body starts locking down the intercostals in the rib cage, and we get very poor movement in there. So let's have you flip around backwards. We're going to do the posterior rib. So we're going to go right into, find that posterior ribs right in here, and I should feel some outward movement. It's not going to be near as much as I'm getting into the front side. But you're going to want to imagine filling into, basically it's called the paraspinals, but you find that lowest rib, go right down below it, and you'll feel that outward movement. And if we don't have any outward movement, that's not good, and we want to work on practicing that. Now, again, it's not going to be as prominent as, say, the obliques or the lower ab. And I did already hit the rib cage expansion on there. So we're going to move this into what we call a supine position. So we just showed it in a seated, which is actually going to be a little bit more challenging, but it was best for the video to do that. So when you're first practicing, if we actually remove more of the stressors out of here, it'll make it easier. So this is a great place to start. So we're going to get up here, 90 degrees at the legs, 90 degrees at the ankles, just kind of removing tension in the body. So it's the same thing. If I had somebody and I see some stress here, like just relax, relax, good. And Cass could actually reach in here herself, right here. So fingers and thumb, and you can get the thumb into the oblique, and it's right about the right distance to get into that lower belt line and feel that expansion. Boom. We're not going to be able to check the posterior rib from this one. Actually, you probably could. You could slide your hand under there. So if you're lacking shoulder mobility, that might be an issue. And I could do it as well if I just went in from here as well. But you should be able to slide in there and check yourself. And we're going to see this nice, she has her shirt pulled up, so we can see the kind of the open roundness that we're creating with that belly. So again, this is yet another way why our breathing patterns get off, is because, one, we talked about the stressors, we talked about technology, but the last one is appearance. We're always taught we want to suck it in, pull it in, keep it tight, go into the beach, don't want to look big. And you know, people often talk about, man, Chris, you've got a big belly. But you can see visible abs on it, but it's round because I let it loose and hang in that position all the way around. But you see, we've got that upward wave, and you can see all the way into the lower rib. So it starts down low, it's moving up into here. Again, we're not seeing any movement this way in her breathing patterns. So, great way to do what we want to do. Actually, we'll show the last one. So let's roll over to your stomach. This one would take a partner. So you could do it without the weight, but we find with the weight seems to work much better. And actually, we'll keep the shirt up on this because we want to see the oblique expansion. Okay, so with this, and we're going to see that belly raising up, and you're kind of pushing away from that floor, but we want to see outward expansion of the obliques too. We call this crocodile breathing because if you look up a video of a crocodile breathing on the ground, you'll see this outward expansion to the side. And then what we like to do is add a little weight. You're never going to do this if you have any sort of history of spinal injury, and be very careful as you set this on someone. But usually about a 20-pound load works pretty well. And this will help bring that response in there. So you can see we actually saw an improvement in breathing right away. But it's also going to cue that paraspinal area that we talked about, that lower posterior rib, and feel that breathing through there. How's that feel, Cass?
Good, yeah.
So this can be really effective, but again, might take somebody else. But it's not a drill that you're going to do. None of these drills are ones that you're going to do all the time. What we want to do is find the right drill, find where you're lacking, and bring some awareness to it. And then, once you've got it down, you can do it while you're driving, while you're sitting watching TV, while you're at your desk at work, but do 20 conscious breaths, focusing on the quality of it. Just do it a couple times a day for 3 or 4 weeks, and then you'll start seeing change. You won't have to do it as frequently, but you may have to come back and revisit every now and again. Maybe life stressors kick in or other things happen and we start getting a little bit of breakdown. Just practice. Where am I breathing to? But first, we want to teach you how to do it, which is why we walked through all these drills. Cass, you can get off the floor there and add any comments or anything that I missed over the scope of that.
Well, I think you hit it on the nail pretty good. I think another factor to think about is a lot of times people will try to breathe as big as they can when they're trying to master these drills, and a cue that has helped a lot of people is just, again, to relax. But it's not about the biggest breath you can take in these drills. I wasn't taking a giant breath to get as much air as I could into my belly, because air alone is not a stabilizing force. But we're just trying to get the mechanics down, getting the diaphragm in the correct pattern of breathing.
That's a really important discussion, Cass, because sometimes as you're practicing this, you might have to take a little bit shallower breaths until you get it down. So this is something that can be a little counterintuitive, but we might have to deep a little bit shallower if we haven't been breathing properly and we're practicing before we develop those motor pathways again, or redevelop, turn those on. And so that's okay. That's okay. And then exactly, and we've got a slide up here actually on this, so let's go ahead and cover this really quick. This kind of starts rolling into the next piece, but we actually cover it during the breathing piece. So we want to understand that air alone is not the stabilizing force. Okay? So a lot of people think big air before they lift, and it's not necessarily appropriate. So understand that actually that diaphragm driving down, this whole area, there is no air here at all. The air is going in your lungs so that you don't pass out or die, okay? But the stabilization is actually coming from the pressure of the internal organs being compressed from the diaphragm movement, which can happen independent of air or respiration. So the bigger air, big air, isn't necessarily what we're looking for with that. So we want to think of proper breathing as a giant ball pressing outwards in all directions, and really look for that quality of that eccentric load and getting that dialed in. So I think that pretty well wraps up our discussion on breathing. Again, what I want you to do is find the drills, find the gaps, and then once you've got that and a good feeling of, I've got that good diaphragmatic wave going all the way around, traveling up, practice that 20 times, 2, maybe 3 times a day for a couple weeks, and then you can drop it to every other day or a couple of times a week from there, once we get those corrections done. Okay. All right, shall we close it up?
Yeah.
Please join us for the next piece in our movement fundamentals when we move into bracing.